Hey, good morning. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the educator and collections coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. We're a small not-for-profit that is tasked with preserving and interpreting North Carolina's oldest standing lighthouse. And you probably know that if you've been on our Facebook page already to take a look at this video, this live program. We're calling these 10 a.m. programs each day quarantine collections because, yes, we are in the midst of a public health crisis, so I'm sure all of you, like all of our staff, are self-isolating, kind of hunkering down at home and making sure everybody's safe and healthy and sound. So on today's quarantine collections, I pulled out one of our most diverse and one of our most fascinating collections of correspondence or letters, photographs, checks, a whole variety of ephemera. It's a big word, ephemera. It just means knickknacks of the archives world, scraps of paper, programs, pamphlets, a hodgepodge of different, typically written or paper products. Now, Thomas Franklin Boyd is the name of the collection, and it really involves not only Thomas Franklin Boyd, but several generations afterwards, being his children and his grandchildren. Thomas Franklin Boyd owned Bald Head Island from about 1914 to the mid-30s, right when the Great Depression is hitting and ravishing the United States and the world at the time. So he owned this island at an integral or significant moment in American history, and arguably you can call him the first developer of Bald Head Island. Now, it doesn't really have a happy ending, but I don't want to skip ahead to the end of the story. But he can be called the first developer of Bald Head Island in this era when the beach and tourism, as we know it today in southeastern North Carolina, is born. So let's dive into this collection. First of all, I want to thank several generations of the Boyd family who donated these different papers and photographs to the Old Baldy Foundation. There is also a significant collection of papers and ephemera related to Thomas Franklin Boyd at the New Hanover County Public Library, a county just north of us here in Brunswick County. Their special collections, or their North Carolina room they call it, has a great a collection of documents related to Thomas Franklin Boyd. And they also have a really great video that I'm going to show you behind me here that we put on exhibit. How exciting to see Bald Head Island videotaped in 1917. I mean, it's absolutely surreal to see Old Baldy videotaped when she's actually in service, to see the life-saving servicemen on South Beach performing their beach apparatus drill. You may have joined us yesterday afternoon or watched after we posted the program out at the Shoals Club talking about Cape Fear Life Saving Station. And all kinds of ships and whatnot out in the Cape Fear River. It's a surreal video, and we're going to get to that today. So let's dive into the collection here. So Thomas Franklin Boyd was born in 1863. He was the very last son of Thomas Franklin, his father. His father was wounded at the Battle of Fredericksburg during the American Civil War in 1862. So it seems like, Thomas Franklin Boyd was conceived probably while his father was on furlough visiting his mother out in western North Carolina. But when he grows up, he gets his start in Hamlet, North Carolina. It's between basically Wilmington and Charlotte, and he sees a vast economic opportunity to pull himself up by his bootstraps and to become an entrepreneur with a variety of businesses. We're talking about developments. We're talking about railroad. We're talking about hotels, a distillery, a variety of different business adventures Some of you may be joining us from Wilmington. We had several students that were based out of Wilmington for our unfortunately canceled field trips, and I know many of you students are listening in and joining us on these programs. Sunset Park Elementary School. Thomas Franklin Boyd was the developer of Sunset Park. You also may eventually find yourself attending New Hanover High School. Thomas Franklin Boyd was the contractor in charge of building New Hanover County High School. So some interesting Wilmington collections that our listeners may be aware of up in Wilmington. But it wasn't until 1914 that his entrepreneurial spirit brings him to Bald Head Island. And he is brought here because all up and down the coast in southeastern North Carolina, different beach communities are being born in the early 20th century. You have Wrightsville Beach. You get on a train in the late 1880s. It's established in through the 1890s. In downtown Wilmington for, I think, it was 25 cents or whatnot. At least at one point it was 25 cents. And you got on the train down there not far from Front Street. They lined up on Princess Street, if you're familiar, between 2nd and Front. And you took a train out to Wrightsville Beach. There was no highway yet. There was no bridge to get your vehicle or your horse and buggy over across the sound and onto Wrightsville Beach as we know it today. You got on that train, and that was a developer that created that opportunity to go out and see Wrightsville Beach. Well, another beach in our area that you may be familiar with is Carolina Beach. Now, you didn't get quite on a train in Carolina Beach. You did at one point, but you got on a steamer in downtown Wilmington, right there along the River Walk as we know it today. And that steamship took you down the Cape Fear River to whereabouts, kind of like a Sunny Point. The Arms Depot kind of probably owns the land where the ship docked there on the riverside of Carolina Beach. And then you took a small train called, I believe it was called the Shoe Fly. You took a small train called the Shoe Fly from the river across the peninsula of Carolina Beach, now an island, to the boardwalk as we know it today. So Thomas Franklin Boyd would travel each summer to be with his brother-in-law in Wrightsville Beach. His brother-in-law was named Eli. Students and everybody listening, remember that name, Eli, is going to become very important a little bit later on. And then in 1908, Thomas Franklin Boyd had the opportunity to purchase the Hanover Seaside Club. You see a picture here of the Hanover Seaside Club. It was a social club located on Carolina Beach. He bought it because the social club moved to Wrightsville Beach. They moved from Carolina Beach to Wrightsville Beach around 1908. And Thomas Franklin Boyd purchased this big abandoned social club to serve as a beach house for his family, so he didn't have to keep bothering his brother-in-law and filling his cottage or cabin up at Wrightsville Beach. So I'm going to pause there in a moment. You've got some really great comments out there. I see Abby and Chris on our staff. Chris is here on the island with me and Jess, and Abby and McCallie, our other team members, have been self-isolating up in Wilmington. They've been working remotely. The Old Baldy Foundation, we're trying to do everything we can to make this situation better and certainly not do anything to detract from flattening the curve, as everybody was saying. So, hey Chris, hey Abby, thanks for joining in and supporting me. If you're listening in, I see we have quite a few listeners here. Give us a comment. I can see them right in front of me. Tell me where you're from, where you're listening to. Perhaps tell me what your connection is to Bald Head Island. Have you visited Old Baldy Lighthouse? Are you planning on visiting Old Baldy Lighthouse? Perhaps you climb 3 or 4 times every year as a family. So I would love to hear you in the comments. Just give a shout out. And also, if you have any questions about the material that I'm talking about, especially you students out there listening, whether it be live or whether it be a little bit later on, give us a question in the comments, and we'll be sure today to answer that question for you. Or if you're not going to listen live, we'll be sure to watch that and answer any questions that you may have. So again, the first thing I pulled out of the Thomas Franklin Boyd collection is the Hanover Seaside Club, a postcard or a photograph. In 1908, Thomas Franklin Boyd buys this, and it serves as his family's beach house. There's an oral history in this collection. It's basically a transcript or a typed out document based on one of his daughter's oral history, meaning that she recorded her thoughts and her memories of being a child, and then someone sat down and listened to that recording long ago and transcribed it so I can read it. And one of the best memories she has of this beach house for her family on Carolina Beach is at high tide, the water would go underneath. You can see on the bottom there are pilings like so many beach houses do in southeastern North Carolina and other coastal communities. So she remembers the water at high tide, once or twice a day, going up underneath the house and then receding. It must have been cool to listen to that upstairs, going in from the floorboards. So in 1908 to about 1914, the family is vacationing now at Carolina Beach. Just like many of you do, if you're local, we all love to go down to Carolina Beach. We have staff members that live at Carolina Beach. Now, remember, he's an entrepreneur. And remember that he's kind of a restless soul. He has all these different businesses out in Hamlet. So it only makes sense when Bald Head Island, or he probably knew it as more like Smith Island, and we talked about that yesterday, the Smith Island complex, the county of Brunswick County, our county that we live in, wasn't getting any tax revenue. The gentleman or the family that owned the island here, not the Smiths, but it was passed down to a family called the Walkers, they were not doing a very good job about paying their taxes. So eventually, the county took it over. They took over the entire island, and they sold it at auction. And Thomas Franklin Boyd got the itch, got the urge. He was in love with Carolina Beach, in love with Wrightsville Beach, and he could just see this vision of having a beach resort on Bald Head Island. And after buying this island in 1914, he dubs it Palmetto Island. It's a marketing tool, just like the name Bald Head Island is, arguably a marketing tool. It's not the, as I said, the politically correct term for this place. So Thomas Franklin Boyd buys this island in the year 1914, and immediately things began flying off the shelf. He is communicating to a little bit of everybody. Certainly, he's communicating to the Kure family. Kure Beach is just south of Carolina Beach, between Bald Head Island and Carolina Beach. And there was a family, just like the Boyd family, that had purchased lots of acreage there at Carolina Beach, and they were developing this Kure Beach. Well, lo and behold, as they're working together to create Palmetto Island, probably bouncing ideas off of one another, probably plenty of nights spent on the porch of the old Hanover Seaside Club talking about their dreams for Kure Beach and Palmetto Island. One of Thomas Franklin Boyd's daughters, named Lula, falls in love with one of the Kure boys. And we have in this collection lots and lots of love letters between the two. This is the 19-teens. It's the Edwardian era, I guess you want to call it. It's right before the 1920s, the Gatsby-esque era that a lot of folks really have fallen in love with as of late. So we have just a beautiful narrative of these two young individuals falling in love while their families are building the beaches that we know and love today. And that collection up at the library has lots of love letters too. And I really like it. I'm not sure if this one is one I pulled out, but one of my favorite things about the love letters between Lula Boyd and Andrew Kure is the fact that they have on the stationery Kure land development. So we have lots of stationery from early Kure Beach. So you might wonder if Thomas Franklin Boyd wanted to create Palmetto Island, he wanted to create a resort here on Bald Head Island. Well, what did he find? What did he buy when he purchased Bald Head Island from the county? Well, somebody took a series of photographs and put them into a scrapbook in this collection, one of the Boyds. And one of the most important structures that was here on Bald Head Island in 1914, when Thomas Franklin Boyd purchased the island, was Cape Fear Light Station. And you see it there in this photograph. Doing my best not to touch and finger this photograph too much. All our oily hands gets the best of us. So everything like this is stored in acid-free folders. It's buffered in between with acid-free paper. It's stored in an acid-free box to make sure all that acid from paper, because paper comes from trees, and from our hands are not getting on the photographs and discoloring them any more than they already are. So Cape Fear Light Station, we're going to talk about that next week, but that was the third lighthouse built on Bald Head Island. We have the original lighthouse, finished around 1794, that we discussed on yesterday's Quarantine Collections. Of course, we have Old Baldy. We know and love Old Baldy Lighthouse. That's the lighthouse you can climb today. But from 1903 to 1958, corresponding with Thomas Franklin Boyd's ownership of Bald Head Island, we had a third lighthouse called Cape Fear Light Station. It was located, if you're familiar with the island, out towards the Bald Head Island Conservancy and the Shoals Club. Well, lots of shipping. Clearly, the Port of Wilmington is just as busy back then as it is today. I was out on the beach last evening with our executive director, and there was a big old ship going by, going over the bar of the river. So just as busy with maritime traffic going in and out of the Cape Fear River, and lots of maritime forest. If you are familiar with Bald Head Island, our maritime forest is very renowned. It's beautiful, it's lush. Folks come here and they're mesmerized by our ancient live oaks. I'm looking out over a live oak right now that we think is roughly 400 to 500 years old. It saw everything around here, from the construction of that first lighthouse to its deconstruction to Old Baldy. It is truly a witness tree. And also with those live oaks are all those palmettos. So it's not very hard to figure out how Thomas Franklin Boyd came up with this name, Palmetto Island. The palmettos abound on Bald Head Island. And there you see this beautiful picture of these ladies in Edwardian white summer dresses, probably cotton summer dresses, exploring the maritime forest. Folks, history isn't too long ago. Folks visited Bald Head Island as tourists. They hiked through the maritime forest. They went to the beach. You can see the surf just as we do today. These folks are not too far away from ourselves. Christy Hutcherson. Hi, Travis. Hey, Christy, thank you for joining us. Where are you from, Christy? What's your connection to Bald Head Island? I see Julianne Berg is watching. We went to college together up in Maryland. Lord bless you, Julianne. I think that you've gotten enough of me lecturing about history in the past 7 years, so clearly you haven't gotten enough. And in the case behind me is another piece of this scrapbook from the Thomas Franklin Boyd collection, and it's showing another just beautiful, I call it kind of romantic, haunting in almost a good way, of a woman standing right beside a palmetto tree in her white Edwardian summer cotton dress. And she has a parasol with her to hide her face, probably from the sun. It's a very beautiful picture, and on our field trips this year, the students, do a scavenger hunt here in our museum, and that is one of the objects in our collections that they're looking for, that color Woman with Parasol. Christy, she's from Lynchburg, Virginia. You just took my husband and I on your first tour of the year. I do remember that. I'm a big fan of Virginia. I'm a little bit of a Civil War nut, and we're going to talk about the Civil War this afternoon. So I have tramped around Virginia for years with my friend Julianne that I was talking about. I'd always drag her along with me. So Thomas Franklin Boyd, he gets started here by building a hotel. So when you're trying to make a resort, you kind of need two things. You need a reliable way to get to an island surrounded by water, and you need somewhere for people to stay. I mean, there's plenty of things to do, as those photographs were talking about. You could hike the maritime forest or sit on the beach, but where are people going to stay once they get over here, and how are they going to get over here? And those are two pieces of the story of Palmetto Island that foreshadow its very unhappy ending. So unfortunately, we are not the caretakers of several pieces that tell the story of the hotel. We all call it the Boyd Hotel, that was constructed by Thomas Franklin Boyd here on Bald Head Island in the early 1920s. But thankfully, my friends Travis, go figure, another Travis, and Joe up at the North Carolina room at the New Hanover County Public Library, they take very good care of the other half of the Thomas Franklin Boyd collection, and their half includes several photographs of the hotel. And I just want to point out here on my cell phone, you can see, and it's not showing up very well, I do apologize. How about I post it in the comments a little bit later? But that is a picture of the hotel that Thomas Franklin Boyd constructed on our western beach along the Cape Fear River in the early 1920s. And also, they have a floor plan for the hotel, so we know exactly the amenities inside. There were small rooms upstairs leading to the left or the right of a central hallway. Downstairs, there was a piano room. I'm sure there was a lot of piano playing. I remember writing an article back in the summer. I was just thinking about the piano music drifting across the Cape Fear River on a silent southern summer night. It must have been very romantic, and I'm sure that there was lots of reasons to celebrate in that piano room before it all goes wrong. There's a sitting room, there's a parlor, and then there's a dining room, and there was a small detached kitchen in the back. There's a great picture of that in David Stick's book about Bald Head Island, which predates the Old Baldy Foundation's publication of the story of Cape Fear and Bald Head Island by Kevin Duffus. So, curious enough about this, and I would be remiss if I did not bring it up. This blueprint, if you will, is all handwritten, and I'll post it in the pictures here. It's all handwritten, and it's on the back of a movie poster. So clearly this guy is quite a dreamer. Clearly Thomas Franklin Boyd's mind never turns off. So he somehow got a movie poster from downtown Wilmington. I can't remember which movie theater it was, but there were several in downtown before they moved out to the suburbs. And he is literally sketching a blueprint for his hotel that later he constructs. So what a mind, what a dreamer. So Thomas Franklin Boyd has a place for folks to stay. He also began surveying the island out into different communities. One was called Oyster Platte. There were several other names, just as Bald Head Island has communities today. We have Cape Fear Station out near the Shoals Club. We have the Marina Village. We have the shops at the Maritime Way. Little communities within Bald Head Island. Thomas Franklin Boyd is doing the same thing, surveying these communities out so folks can hopefully begin building beach cottages so they don't have to stay in that hotel. Now, how is he going to get folks over here? Remember, he's an island. That's the second problem we have. Well, he's contracting with the steamer the Wilmington. That was his grand plan. there was this steamer, a steamboat, that was traveling back and forth between downtown Wilmington and Carolina Beach. It was also traveling back and forth between Wilmington and Southport. Different depots or different schedules throughout this late 19th century, early 20th century. So he is trying to convince the owner of the steamer Wilmington, hey, you can be coming down here and you can be delivering folks to Bald Head Island and taking them off. Remember, he's an entrepreneur, so he's saying there's money to be made here for you and me. And one of the ways we know about this, and I have to take the camera off because it is actually on exhibit right now, so I'm going to bring you over to one of our cases in our small history museum. So if you look down here, in that case right there is a letter written in August of 1926, and it is from a gentleman named Thomas H. Hooper. And Thomas H. Hooper is representing a committee of colored citizens in Wilmington. And he is writing Thomas Franklin Boyd, saying that in this era of Jim Crow, and students, that's a word that you're probably learning about in your history class right now. Jim Crow is this era in American history where many public services and amenities, such as steamships, they're segregated. If you're African American, you had to use one amenity like a bathroom, a water fountain, a train car, an automobile, perhaps eventually like public transportation, and certainly that involves a steamship. And certainly that involves a beach in these coastal communities. And if you're white, you got to use the public, a white beach or train car or steamer. So that 1926 letter from Thomas Hooper, it's a collection of African Americans in Wilmington, and they're writing Thomas Franklin Boyd here at Palmetto Island saying, hey, would you be willing to allow a group of African Americans to travel on the steamer Wilmington that we know that you have an intimate relationship with and use your beaches for a day? Would you desegregate your beach? Would you welcome us African Americans when we are not welcome on other beaches in North Carolina and in southeastern North Carolina around Wilmington? Now, unfortunately, we don't know the answer to Thomas Franklin Boyd. We don't know Thomas Franklin Boyd's answer. So we don't know if Mr. Hooper and all of his friends and colleagues were able to spend a day in the surf on the beach here at Palmetto Island, leaving the horrors of segregation behind, at least for one day. We are unsure, but that is one of my roles as a historian, and McCallie Givens on our staff, our other historian. We're going to get eventually to the bottom of it. Hopefully we can find an answer through maybe there's a document out there in somebody else's Thomas Franklin Boyd collection that we're not aware of. Or perhaps we just have not thoroughly looked through the newspaper records yet. Perhaps they published their itinerary or their schedule in the newspaper and we have yet to see that. It's one of the many questions I have here in this role as the educator and collections coordinator at the Old Baldy Foundation. And perhaps one day we'll know what Mr. Hooper's answer was. Now, unfortunately, things began to go sour around 1918, and definitely when Mr. Hooper is writing Thomas Franklin Boyd. One of the many letters or pieces of correspondence we have in the Thomas Franklin Boyd collection begins to show you what is happening. See an envelope here. It's a letter, and don't worry, I've washed my hands. You can see up there the YMCA. I'm a great supporter of the YMCA. I'm very sad that it's closed right now, but I understand, like so many of us, our lives are a little different right now, but it's better for everybody. Well, the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, with the colors, they're providing stationery to soldiers because in 1918, well, America is fighting the First World War, this war to end all wars. And Thomas Franklin Boyd has a son that serves in the World War. And fortunately, he survives the war, but we have several pieces of correspondence of him writing from the Western Front in Europe back home to mom and dad and brothers and sisters saying, hey, I'm okay, don't worry about me, how are things back on the home front? Well, that is a great segue about what happens that's very kind of poignant for what is going on today. Unfortunately, because the world was seeing a massive transfer and a massive movement of troops due to the World War, a pandemic broke out. The Spanish influenza, it's often common. It was basically the Spanish flu is a colloquial or kind of layman's term for it. And there were hundreds of thousands of Americans and millions of citizens of the world that died of this pandemic in 1918, largely caused by the movement of these troops in World War II, like that young Boyd son. Well, the Boyds, they come to Bald Head Island to get away from it. They own this island. The hotel is not finished yet, but they do have the abandoned keeper's cottage or keeper's house at Old Baldy Lighthouse. And they stay there. They think that they're safe. They're away from the mainland. Unfortunately, like we have learned right now, the school started canceling. And they had a son named Bob that was in school back at Hamlet. So Thomas Franklin Boyd had to leave his family, leave the comfort of Bald Head Island, and go back to get Bob, who unfortunately became ill through this community infection, is basically the word we're learning. He got it from a classmate or a teacher or walking home from school. Fortunately, Bob survived, but remember that brother-in-law Eli that introduced Wrightsville Beach and the modern beach to Thomas Franklin Boyd? He passed away, and many other family members passed away. And thanks to an oral history we have in this collection, we know that the mother of the Boyd children, Thomas's wife, and several of the children that were left behind at the keeper's cottage, they got ill too. The flu eventually found them on Bald Head Island. And it coincided with a terrible nor'easter, a terrible storm, when they all got ill. And they had to rely on the Coast Guard station we're going to learn about next week, after the life-saving service is completed in operations in 1915. We get a Coast Guard station here, and they provided help, they provided a doctor, so fortunately everybody in Thomas's family survives. But the war, the pandemic, they begin foreshadowing what is to occur, that Palmetto Island is not going to be successful. Now, eventually a hurricane happens. Eventually, the Wilmington, that steamer, is sold down to Charleston, so now he has no way of folks to get here. None of the cottages are built, and then the Great Depression hits. And nobody is going to be building a beach house or a beach cottage during Great Depression. So Thomas Franklin Boyd passes away in 1934 amidst the Great Depression. His dreams crushed about Palmetto Island. They're on paper on the back of that movie poster. He got as far as a hotel, but it never truly kicked off. And it wouldn't be till the 1970s that another developer arrives on Bald Head Island and has largely another failed start. It's not until the very recent memory that we have a successful developer that turns Bald Head Island into the place we know and love today. But that developer, that current developer, Bald Head Island Limited, or George Mitchell, they're standing upon the shoulders of folks like Thomas Franklin Boyd that began paving the way to creating a beach community, a community in itself here on Bald Head Island. So, hey, thanks for joining us for this quarantine collection here on this Friday. Tomorrow is Saturday, but we are going to be doing a quarantine collections tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Also, this afternoon, we're going to be going out to to battery number 3 at Ford Homes. It's one of the lesser-known batteries where cannons were placed during the American Civil War in what we call Fort Homes. It was our Confederate fort here on Bald Head Island. It's in an obscure part of the island. We don't take people on a tour out there, so it's a really great opportunity to learn about a piece of Civil War history here on Bold Head Island that most folks, even locals, don't get to see very often, if not at all. So we would love to have you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Remember, if you have any questions, please give them in the comments. We will be doing our very best to answering those questions throughout the day and into the rest of the weekend. Also, I'm going to be posting another video here a little bit later about the video, the promotional video that I spoke about earlier in this broadcast. We will post a link to the New Hanover County Library and the state archives, basically, their copy of that video that shows what Palmetto Island looked like in 1917 as a way to promote and market these beach cottages for Thomas Franklin Boyd. So again, thank you for joining us. I was so honored to have you with us. To folks listening in the future, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you all at a later program. Thanks.